Baptist and sought to become a minister. But the more he studied, the further removed he became from any gods. Matt's been known to say, science is the only thing that disproves science, and it does it all the time. Please welcome to the Chan Center stage, Matt Dillahunty. Kind of a rock star. All right, from 1995 to 2008, Richard Dawkins was the Charles Simonyi Professor of the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University. He is an internationally best-selling author. Among his books are The Selfish Gene, The Blind Watchmaker, The God Delusion, which is my favorite, The Greatest Show on Earth, and The Magic of Reality. He has opened millions of minds to evolutionary biology, skepticism, reason, and the concept of evidence. Richard has said, natural selection will not remove ignorance from future generations. He is a hero of mine and many. Please welcome to the Chan Center stage, Richard Dawkins. Thank you, guys. Take it away.
Please forgive me if I croak. It's because I've had a stroke. Basal ganglion on the right makes me walk as if I'm tight. So if I fall to croaks and squawking, Matt will have to do the talking.
And I think anybody who knows me knows that talking's not a problem. It's ceasing to talk is probably a bigger issue. Hello, Vancouver. Thank you so much for coming out. I know I have some friends here and some other people who've commented on stuff from the show. I'm thrilled to be here, and especially to be here with Richard. I almost forgot his name. It's been a really weird experience. Now, we first met 10 years ago, although there was no reason that Richard should remember it because he was touring promoting The God Delusion and came to Austin, and I had just got an Out campaign tattoo on my arm and happened to be with CFI and came up and showed him, and he rushed over to get his phone to take a picture of it to prove that it was the first Out campaign tattoo. Because I know a bunch of other people went out and did it, but I got there first. But I polled some people saying, hey, I'm going to have this opportunity. Are there questions you'd like to ask? And the one thing that came up that I wanted to ask about has absolutely nothing, or perhaps absolutely nothing to do with religion. And it is this idea that was in, I believe, your second book, The Extended Phenotype. And you've given explanations for it. When I look around the world at the general ignorance on science issues, and I'm as guilty as many other people, what is it, could you give a description of the extended phenotype, we're starting heavy, that also gets to what people really need to understand about it?
About the extended phenotype, we need to understand. Well, that takes a whole book to explain. That's why I wrote it. Okay, let me have a go at explaining the extended phenotype. Phenotype means those things that a gene affects, and from a Darwinian point of view, those things that a gene affects which get it levered into the next generation. So my view of life is that it's all about genes manipulating the world to get into the next generation. The world, in this case, largely means the body in which the gene sits, but it doesn't have to mean that. So normally when we talk about the phenotypic expression of a gene, we mean the effect that it has on the body in which the gene sits, and the body in which the gene sits is the vehicle that carries the genes around. And if the body survives, the genes survive. At least if the body reproduces, the genes survive. It has to survive in order to reproduce first. So that's the ordinary meaning of phenotype. Extended phenotype means that the phenotype of a gene, those aspects of the phenotype which enable the gene to pass on to the next generation, do not have to be confined to the body itself. A good example would be a bird's nest. A bird's nest is quite clearly an adaptation for the genes to survive. It's not for the body to survive, for the genes to survive. Its shape, its color, everything about it may have Darwinian survival value, but it's not a part of the animal, of the bird's body. If you buy that, and you'd have to do the same thing for spider webs and beaver dams and things like that. If you buy that, then a parasite sitting in a host very often manipulates the behavior of the host in order that the parasite shall get passed on to its next stage in its life history. There's a lovely worm called the brain worm, a little fluke, which parasitizes ants. From the fluke's point of view, it needs the ant to get eaten by an ungulate, by a sheep, say. Normally, ants during the heat of the day of this species, the ants would go down into the ground. The fluke wants the ants to go up onto the tops of the grass stems, where they're more likely to be eaten. So the fluke actually burrows into the brain of the ant and makes a lesion in the brain of the ant, which changes the behavior of the ant, so it goes up instead of down. That increases the chance that the fluke will be eaten by the sheep, and that's what the fluke wants, using the word wants in quotes, which of course you all understand what I mean by that. This is an adaptation by the fluke genes. The ant is the proximate manipulee, let's say, the proximate victim of manipulation of the fluke. You could call the ant's behavior, the change in the ant's behavior, as part of the extended phenotype of genes in the fluke. So in other words, genes in one animal can have extended phenotypic effects in another animal. Well, if you buy that, then a parasite doesn't have to be sitting in the host. A cuckoo, as you know, it's a bird that parasitizes other birds, makes them rear its young. Very, very sophisticated adaptations, highly sophisticated adaptations. The genes in the cuckoo are manipulating the behavior of the host, even though the host is not, even though the parasite's not actually inside the host. It's still extended phenotype. And if you buy that, then any kind of animal communication, bird song, singing from one end of a wood, influencing a female at the other end of the wood, that's extended phenotype too. So, well, that's the extended phenotype, and I haven't really had time to do it justice, so
sure.
You just have to go and read the book.
By all means, read the book. One of the reasons that I ask is because when we begin to talk about what we typically view genes as doing, and when we extend this to perhaps behaviors, the thing I wonder is how far can we extend it, and where do you draw a line? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, the God gene and things like this. If we are our genes and they're dictating behavior, is it a stretch too far to suggest that the type of thinking that leads to religious thinking is also in our makeup, and how do you escape that?
Yes, it might be a stretch too far. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think it's probably true to say that religiosity is influenced by genetics. And the kind of way you would test a claim of that kind would be perhaps to look at twin studies, to compare monozygotic, that's identical twins, with dizygotic ordinary twins. And if the characteristic you're interested in this case religiosity, is more likely to be shared by identical twins than fraternal twins, even if the identical twins are reared apart, which they sometimes are for accidental reasons, then we have evidence of genetic influence on variation. And there is some influence, not surprising. I mean, genes influence just about everything else, and there's no reason why they shouldn't influence religiosity. To be interesting in a Darwinian way, you would need to show that the genes engineer their survival by increasing the religiosity of the body in which they sit. Maybe they do, but that might be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. There are people who call the show frequently. I'd love to ask you why people call to ask me questions about science, but we know that the most common answer that I've given when people are calling into the show to ask, hey, this disproves evolution, and I ask them, why the hell are you calling me, a non-scientist on a public access show? Why aren't you out seeking your Nobel Prize and publishing to get,
That's a good point, yes.
I think it speaks volumes about their hypothesis, if it could even be called that they are calling to present it to me. But one of the questions that I got, which I have my thoughts on an answer, but as somebody who's not as versed in the science, I'm probably wrong. Have human beings trumped evolution? Or have we escaped natural selection? Have we, and I know I despise this idea of advancing so far to a point, but are we at a point where we control our own fates and natural selection is just out the window for us?
If we have, then that has nothing whatever to do with this disproving evolution. I mean, that's the important point to make. If that's what they're trying to say, then it just simply is illogical. There's no connection whatever. It is an interesting question. It does appear that we have largely removed ourselves from at least the cutting edge of natural selection. As far as survival is concerned, natural selection matters if it kills you before you have time to reproduce.
Right.
And in our civilization, it's rather... in our civilization, it's rather hard to die young. And so most people reach the age when they could reproduce. So we're no longer being selected for fleetness of foot, keenness of mind, keenness of sight, that kind of thing. Because with handicaps in any of those fields, you can still survive long enough to reproduce. So probably, if there is any natural selection going on in an interesting way, of course there is natural selection against diseases and things like that, but if the sort of interesting natural selection is going on, it's probably with respect to reproduction rather than survival. Not everybody has the same number of children. Some people have lots of children, some people have none. If there is genetic variation in the desire to have children, then that would by definition be natural selection in favor of something. Well, I don't know whether there is, but as I said before, there's genetic variation in most other things, so it would be a little bit surprising if there wasn't a genetic influence, a statistical genetic influence on the inclination to have children. Or it could be a statistical effect on incompetence in using contraceptives.
Oh, the Catholics are going to come after you for that one, because it's not incompetence. You're just not allowed to do that.
Actually, let me tell you a story about that. It's kind of about that. I was doing a television program, and I was sent out to Kenya, to Nairobi, to the slums of Nairobi, to interview a prostitute, because there is evidence in Kenya of a genetic resistance to AIDS. And there are some prostitutes in Nairobi who are massively exposed to HIV, but who don't get AIDS. And this woman was one such. And she's being researched by actually a Canadian team of geneticists. So I was sent to interview her, and I said, how long have you been a prostitute, and she told me 20 years or 25 years, something like that. And I said, what's happened to all your friends who joined at the same, who did start at the same time? They're all dead, she said, of AIDS. So I said, well, why do you think you're not dead? And she said, well, God must be looking after me. So then I said, well then, why didn't God look after all your friends? And she said, well, I can't understand that, but I tell you this, she said, God loves condoms.
I want to go to Kenya and interview prostitutes too, but for completely different reasons. So one of the things that was curious to me is we come from very different backgrounds and fell into what we do for somewhat different reasons. I mean, you're one of the world's most eminent and popular scientists, and you have a passion for science education. And I'm just some redneck who was raised a Southern Baptist and figured out this shit makes no sense. And I've spent the time on the show doing what I can to try to have the conversations. You've done something that I haven't done and may never do, and that is you have an entire foundation dedicated to science and reason. And I want to make sure that there's an opportunity to talk about that. What has the foundation been doing and the goals so that people who weren't aware become aware?
Yes, after The God Delusion was published, I founded the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, both in Britain and America. I suppose mainly at first as a way in which I could give money in a charitable way, both in Britain and in America. It's difficult for a British taxpayer to give money to American charities. You can do it, but it's kind of hard, and you don't get the tax benefits. So I founded these two foundations. The British Foundation was mainly used as a kind of conduit to get money into America, where I thought it was more needed.
It's also, part of this is because, for whatever reasons, most of my fellow Americans, if I say something, they can blow it off. But if it has your accent, they pay attention to it a little bit more.
I was afraid it might be the other way around, actually. I once was unwise enough to reply to the Guardian request to give advice about two elections, American elections ago, and I gave advice about how nobody should vote for George W. Bush, and I got the most incredible lot of hate mail. You limey, stay out of our affairs, and to which my reply was, the American election affects the entire world, and I kind of resent the fact that we can't vote in it. But I think
so do I.
I got off the point.
When I came through customs, the customs agent said, "Oh, you're going to be giving a talk tomorrow night." I said, "Yes." And I flew in Saturday, and she said, "So you're only here for Sunday, and then you fly home on Monday?" And I was like, "Yes." And this seemed to baffle her a little bit, so she wanted to repeat it. "So you're here for just one day to give a talk?" And I said, "Yes, but depending on the election results on Tuesday, I might be back the following weekend."
Anyway, I digressed. The American Foundation is the one that actually does most of the work, and it's now extremely flourishing, and it's just about to merge with the Center for Inquiry, which is a much larger, flourishing organization in America, and I think also in Canada. And between us, we're doing a lot of exciting things. One of them is the Openly Secular campaign. You're probably aware that in the United States, it's very, very hard for an atheist, or an open atheist, to become a member of Congress. In fact, there aren't any. Out of 535 members of Congress, not a single one admits to being an atheist, and that's a statistical nonsense. They've obviously got to be. Large numbers of them must be. I mean, they're all presumably reasonably well educated. And yet it doesn't seem to be possible to get elected if you're honest in this regard. So you've either got to be religious or a liar to get elected. So the Openly Secular campaign is a campaign to raise consciousness of Americans. I mustn't use that word, of United States citizens. To raise consciousness by making YouTube videos, getting celebrities to make little videos saying, I am openly secular. And we get ordinary people to say, I am openly secular, just nice people, the sort of people you'd like, people you know. I'm not a devil with horns. I'm an ordinary person who you probably like, and I'm openly secular. So that's one of our campaigns. Another one is TIES, the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science. This is to teach middle school teachers how to teach evolution, because they get a lot of pushback, they get a lot of hostility from parents, from some of their children who refuse to listen, stop up their ears, or turn their chairs to face the wall when evolution is being discussed. I've heard stories of teachers who, as soon as they mention the word evolution, their pupils scream, no, 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 I don't believe that. Don't even listen. Well, you could imagine that if you're a teacher who perhaps doesn't have very much specialized knowledge, that's quite intimidating. And so, unless you're rather brave, you'd be likely to sort of shy away from teaching evolution for fear of getting that kind of pushback. So TIES is a campaign to help teachers by telling them how to respond, telling them how to teach evolution, giving them resources they can use, giving them a PowerPoint presentation, giving them lab materials, that kind of thing. It's enormously successful. It's run by a magnificent middle school teacher called Bertha Vasquez from Florida. And she has run a large number of workshops for other teachers, and they're enormously successful. The teachers love them. So that's one of the programs that I'm most keen on. And when we merge with CFI, the Center for Inquiry, we'll suddenly inherit a whole lot of other programs, which I'm also very excited about. So it is one of the main things that I occupy my time with now is the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, and now the Center for Inquiry.
And I'm hoping that, well, you can come down and visit me in Texas wherever you want, but there needs to be a focus in Texas in particular, and I don't want to spend all this time talking about my screwed up country, but Texas is the largest purchaser of school books, and it's a single adoption state. And so there is the constant battle going on with the State Board of Education, because they're not just deciding what students in Texas would learn. It would be tough to write off the entire state, even if that were the case, but the school books that are purchased for Texas get farmed out to other states as well. And I'm a big fan of the Texas Freedom Network, which constantly monitors what the State Board of Education is doing, and getting your organizations and theirs and others to work together. We've had some really, really close calls in Texas. And right before I started with the Atheist Experience, the atheist community of Austin had been in the school book hearings fighting. Some of the changes are incredibly bizarre, scrubbing different people from history. But every couple of years, it's a new course that comes up. So we do history, and then it's maths. And I said maths just for you.
Well, and what do Canadians say?
Is it? There's no S here, right? I knew I loved you guys. But this fight that goes on it's bizarre, and it reflects what you and I deal with when we're dealing with religious individuals as well. And some of it, if not the majority of it, stems from religious individuals. When you have the head of the State Board of Education proudly saying there has to be somebody to stand up to these experts.
Yes. We get that in Britain too. You know about this awful thing called Brexit, which is a catastrophe. One of the leaders of the Brexit campaign, Michael Gove, who was then a cabinet minister, actually went out and said, "Mistrust experts. You are the experts here." Well, I'm afraid that's exactly what happened, and we had a vote from people who are manifestly not experts in the complicated, sophisticated economic question of whether Britain should leave the European Union. It is a major catastrophe. What's even worse is that now the government is trying to deny even the right of Parliament to decide the details of what Brexit should consist of. And the High Court has just ruled that Parliament should be involved, and they're now being threatened by people. You'd think you were in Trump's America. And they're now being physically threatened. These judges are being physically threatened because they want to uphold the constitutional right of Parliament, not to reverse Brexit, but simply to decide on the details.
There's really only room for one person in Trump's America, so. But this issue of experts is something we spoke briefly about earlier. The average person is not going to develop an expertise in every area. You couldn't possibly. And so I'm often accused by people say, "Oh, well, you have faith too. You have faith in the scientists." And I continually point out that what I have is not faith. I have a particular definition of faith, that it's the excuse people give for believing something without a good reason. And I have confidence and trust that is proportional to my reasons and the expertise of individuals. But if somebody said, "Richard Dawkins is the world's foremost expert on biology and everything that he says is true," and you become their expert, that is a massive influence that can be abused. And we see individuals going out and specifically getting degrees that they then ignore their teaching and serve as experts for the creationists. How can the average person know who they should rely on and how much?
That is very difficult, and you're perfectly right that certainly one of the leading so-called experts in the Discovery Institute, the so-called Discovery Institute in Seattle.
I'm waiting for their discovery.
Yeah. He's a Mooney, a follower of the Reverend Moon. And he actually said, "Father," that's their word for the Reverend Moon, "Father chose me to get a PhD in biology so that I could go out and preach against evolution." So you're entirely right there. But it's a serious question you raise, because you're perfectly right. We cannot all become experts in everything. I'm a biologist, and I'm manifestly not an expert in physics. So is it just faith when I accept the Big Bang, quantum theory? Not really, as for just the reason you give. It's not blind faith, it's reasoned faith. We know that the scientific method, the scientific enterprise, has checks and safeguards. We have refereeing papers, we have peer review, we have repetition of experiments which are controversial. If somebody publishes a paper which is an important finding, it will get replicated, it will get repeated, and if it's not repeated, then something's wrong. So we have the scientific method in place, which has been honed and developed over centuries to guard against self-deception, to increase to make it highly likely that the truth will eventually come out. It's not really faith. So we have a kind of trust in not so much the experts, but in we don't say that he's a Nobel Prize winner and therefore he must be right. We never say that.
Although Bob Dylan is right.
Yes, Bob Dylan. And I think that's rather a nice idea for the Nobel Prize for Literature. But don't you think it's high time a scientist got the Nobel Prize for Literature?
It's not just in the realm of science where we are going to struggle with this difficulty over who to trust. We see it in news reports as well. Which news station do you happen to listen to? That's going to dictate what you think the facts are. And it's bad enough for example, in the United States. I've had a bunch of arguments over the past week or so about politics, imagine that. And one of my longtime friends had made the comment of, oh, well, Hillary's getting ready to be indicted on 2 more issues, but I bet you wouldn't accept this particular Fox News source as credible. And he was right to assume that, but as it turns out, that source recanted, and now, as the news today, that they're not going to be in indictments. And I'm waiting to see if this person acknowledges, okay, I made a horrible claim based on faulty information, and I'll retract it, because I don't see that retraction often. Instead, it's, yes, but she's still guilty of this, this, and this. Yeah. And if we have that issue in politics, and we have this issue when it comes to religion, and we have this issue when it comes to science, is it just we're all too damn lazy to do our homework, or is it our day-to-day lives are not consumed with matters of biology or matters of fact-finding on a political issue, and so it doesn't seem as important to us even when it should be that important?
I think in the case of news sources, there is the echo chamber effect has often been mentioned. People tend to tune into the television station that they agree with, and so they just get their views reinforced. I do want to come back, though, to the point that science is a bit different, because science has been tailored to put in place mechanisms for avoiding that kind of thing. Just take one example, the double-blind controlled trial, which is now so important in medical research. With the best will in the world, a scientist is in danger of subtle biases in experimental work. You don't mean to, you're desperately trying not to be biased, but it's extremely hard not to. If you're doing a medical trial, you're testing some new drug against a control. If you desperately want the drug to succeed, then your diagnosis of the patients who've had it may be slightly biased in favor of the drug rather than the control. Or you may be so conscientious that you're even biased in favor of the control. Either way, you want to avoid that kind of bias. So the double-blind controlled trial technique, where neither the doctor nor the patient nor any nurse who's administering the drug or the control knows which is which. This is secret, locked up in code numbers. It's locked up in a computer. Which is the control and which is the experimental drug is not known to any of those people until the experiment is finished, and only then is it unlocked from the computer. So that totally guards against bias of this kind. Science is full, modern science at least, is quite recent. I mean, not that long ago, that kind of safeguard was not in place. Now it is. So science is hedged about with safeguards against that kind of thing.
And it's, I've been accused of scientism, and perhaps I'm even guilty. I think probably the biggest frustration is that most individuals are going to get their information about science from news sources, and we live in a world where every sensationalized headline is the one that's going to get the attention. So it seems like every other day, science, which I'll put in air quotes, has found God or found this, and people don't often go beyond the headline even, let alone to find out what the sources are. And I liken this to what I saw. I was a fundamentalist Christian for more than 25 years and thought that I was supposed to be a preacher. I read the Bible as a child, as a teenager, and then other times as an adult as well. And I remember as I was finding my way out of religion, even though that's not what it felt like at the time, I was studying with the goal of trying to find a way to convince my atheist roommate that he needed Jesus so that we could be in heaven together. And I would read what atheists on some occasion would have to say about the Bible, or what non-Christians would say about the Bible. And when I'd hear what they'd say, I'd say, oh, no, that's not right. I've read this, I've read it many times, I was in Sunday school. you're taking it out of context, you are missing some extra thing. And then I would find, the more I studied, the more I began to realize that no, it wasn't so much that non-believers were taking it out of context, it's I was putting it into a context that completely biased the way I read it. If in fact there is a God who is morally perfect, then when he orders the slaughter of the Midianites, well, that must have been a good thing. There's no way it was a bad thing. When he says that you can have slaves, there must have been some good reason for that. Certainly a morally perfect being, if slavery was actually wrong and this wasn't the case, so you make all these excuses. And I don't know that it's that different when we're talking religion or politics or just in general what we believe about the world we inhabit. Our biases impact everything, and I think the biggest fear I have is that, okay, I've discovered my biases that led me to these conclusions. So now I'm right. Now I'm free of bias, right? So I'm good. And then you find another one and another one. And I was a fan of professional wrestling, and so there's this idea of smarts and marks and then half smarts, and the same thing works in the con artist field and with magic. If you know how people are deceived, you exploit that. And as soon as you think you can't be deceived, you are doomed. You're the one who is now in this position where, I am the enlightened one. I'm not going to fall prey to that again. And that almost guarantees that you're going to fall prey to 10 other things because you've blinded yourself to the possibility that you could be fooled.
I'm very interested in the profession of magic in conjuring because it is a professional deceit, but it seems so much like a miracle that I sort of feel it ought to be a salutary lesson to people who are influenced by apparent miracles. I mean, when you think about what a great conjurer can do, I mean, turning water into wine would be child's play, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. Barry and Stuart do it, and they do it very well. So there's one thing that, kind of a side subject that I thought we'd talk about for a minute, and that's debates, because that's what I do. I live to debate. I will debate almost anybody, although there are some people who I won't debate again for reasons some of you probably already know. There's a couple of different issues here. There's a constant battle over should scientists be debating creationists. I think the general line is no, that it seems to elevate that. But we're in this position where, as bizarre as it feels to us, we represent a minority view. The overwhelming majority of people have some sort of God belief, and so we're in this constant struggle as this minority. How should we engage on those topics? Should it not be the scientists doing it? Is it so much theater that anybody who happens to be good at it should be doing it?
I'm fond of quoting Robert May, who was an Australian scientist working in Britain, who became very distinguished. He became the president of the Royal Society, which is the sort of most distinguished position you can hold as a scientist in Britain. And when he's invited to have a debate with a creationist, he says, "That would look great on your CV, not so good on mine." Which is one way of expressing the point you make about the elevation. I mean, having two chairs on a stage, one with a scientist and one with a creationist, it gives the audience the impression that there's a kind of equality to start off with, that there's really something here to debate about, which of course there isn't. There is no debate to be had. The downside to refusing to debate these people is that they then portray you as a coward, or they say you know you'll lose the debate, so you don't want to do it.
Right.
I've even had somebody who I won't name use the empty chair ploy against me to actually invite me to have a debate with him. I refused. Actually, I refused. I already had a prior engagement in London at the time. So he put an empty chair on the stage to signify the fact that I wasn't there. I sort of feel it's one thing to exploit a scientist by using him. It's to use his absence seems to me to be. I wrote an article in The Guardian explaining why I wasn't going to debate with him. And I said, not only will I not be appearing on the stage in Oxford with this man, I will not be appearing in Birmingham, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dublin, Bristol, and if time allows, Penzance, you know.
And out of deference to your desire to not name him, I won't name him either, but I will say that while this individual desperately wants to debate you, he is desperate to avoid debating me. And he refuses. We even tried to arrange an event where instead of doing a debate, the two of us would sit in chairs exactly like this and talk about our views. And no, there's no way that's going to happen. And that's fine, because you get to decide who you want to engage with, and so does he, and so did I. But he did something rather peculiar. After multiple refusals, he stated that the reason he wouldn't debate me is because I don't have a terminal degree in the relevant field, which is strange because we hadn't even chosen a topic yet. And if the topic were perhaps secular humanism, then I do have a terminal degree in secular humanism, because to my knowledge, there's not one. And I'm pretty sure most secular humanist organizations would gladly give me an honorary terminal degree in order to do the debate. And yet this person runs around desperate to debate scientists on issues in fields where he doesn't have a terminal degree. He's got a degree in philosophy, but he doesn't have a degree in astrophysics or biology. And so my suggestion would be to all of the godless, heathen cohorts of mine who happen to have terminal degrees, stop agreeing to debate him and just say that he doesn't have a terminal degree in the field, and you're just using his own criteria to avoid debating him. So.
I've never heard the phrase terminal degree before. It sounds a bit ominous to me. Like,
and that's why I've avoided getting one. It was just terrifying. I know in a few minutes we're probably going to start taking questions from the audience, and I'll have you guys line up, because the two of us just asking questions isn't necessarily going to get to what some of you might want to hear. But there's a potential point of disagreement. Dun, dun, dun. And so I've said before that I've disagreed with everybody in the movement, including me, over and over again. But there's a question that I get that I know you've received as well. And it seems to be one of the most common questions people ask and what people want to hear most. And unless your answer has changed, I think we may give different answers. And so I wanted to explore that for a minute. On the issue of God, what would change your mind?
well, I used to, and I still really, I think I do say that I, like any good scientist, I would change my mind if evidence came in. And I used to think it was obvious what that evidence would be. I mean, Jesus would return in clouds of glory, and there would be no question about it. And I suppose I would be convinced by that, but I'm somewhat, really it's by the conjuring again. How do I know that it's not a very clever trick put on by Penn and Teller or I mean, when you think of what you guys can do with just card tricks, I could imagine some gullible person being convinced of that's a miracle. Hume's criterion for a miracle, which is more probable, that there really is a violation of the laws of physics, or that you've been deceived, or you're hallucinating, or you've gone mad, or you're dreaming, and it all comes down on the latter. So I'm not totally confident that I know what would convince me. Yeah.
That's fabulous. There's no disagreement. So I had heard, actually, I Imagine No Religion 5, I emceed an event, asked you and Lawrence Krauss questions, and this question had come up, and I've heard both of you give an answer, and I used to give the sort of glib answers of, voices and appearances in the sky or writing and those things. And I realized, the same thing, going back to Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technologies indistinguishable from magic. So glad I speak English, American English, partially. But the answer that I came up with, which is both honest and frustrates the crap out of theists, is I have no idea what would change my mind. I don't, and I find it a bit arrogant to presume that someone should think that I would have the capability of distinguishing a God from some amazingly advanced trickery. I don't know. But if you're right and there is a God, that God should know exactly what it should take to change my mind. And the fact that this God has not done this means that either this God doesn't exist or does not want me to know that he exists. Either way, not my problem. I think there's a bit more that we could talk about if you guys would like to. There's microphones set up on either side, and if you have questions for either or both of us, please just step up and we'll try and alternate between microphones a bit. Did you have anything to...
Do we have the lights up?
Yes. Oh, we can see faces.
Yeah.
So I guess perhaps we'll start on this side. You got there first, you win.
Okay. Hi, this is Armin Navabi from Atheist Republic.
Hey. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you both have heard about Majid Nawaz and Ayaan Hirsi Ali recently being listed as anti-Muslim extremists by a law firm. And I was just wondering if you think, what are your comments about that? And also if you have any suggestions for how we could criticize Islam without being grouped with bigots and racists, and if you think we have made any progress on this in the past 10 years, because it seems like it's getting worse and worse, and we're just being grouped with these other people.
Yeah. So the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks hate groups and things, recently listed both Majid Nawaz and Ayaan Hirsi Ali as, I don't remember exactly what the category is, but labeled them as hate speech with regard to Islam. They're wrong, in my estimation. Is there hateful thought directed at Islam in general? Sure. It's weird when you get into the online community. Quite often, there are people who will do the hashtag #NotAllX. And on some occasions, they'll get mocked. Basically, if we make a generalized statement about some group, somebody will point out it doesn't qualify to every member of that group. Well, of course it doesn't. And this wasn't the presumption. But if there's a fair general criticism of the tenets of Islam or something from the Quran, or a regime that has power that is implementing their version of this, I don't get to decide what a true Muslim is and what a true Muslim is. I don't get to decide what a true Christian is. I don't even get to decide what a true atheist, skeptic, or humanist is. But I do know that saying, well, they're not all bad, is focusing on the people and not the doctrines. And if I focus instead on the doctrines and the actions that some people take, I'm being fair and honest. And if somebody wants to call me a racist for that, okay, fine, too bad. Because I'm not looking at this in terms of race. I'm looking at it in terms of, here's a doctrine, when implemented in this fashion, is dangerous and harmful and counterproductive. There are great people in almost any religion I can think of. And my point is, they could be better if they dumped the religious baggage. And there are bad people in every religion that I could name, and they would be way better if they dumped the religious baggage.
It's a curious thing that the evils of Islam, and I think that Islam is among the great evils of the world, the chief victims of it are actually Muslims themselves. They are the ones who are most likely to be persecuted, especially women. So that's one point. Another point is the accusation of racism as though Islam were a race, which of course it isn't. Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Majid Nawaz are struggling to actually reform Islam from within, to actually recognize that it doesn't have to be bad, and they should obviously be applauded. I think the worst thing of all is the way decent liberal people, our kind of people, give Islam a free pass, which they don't give to any other religion when it comes to things like the betrayal of women, the misogyny that is officially promulgated by Islam is revolting. And yet, feminist thought in Western liberal democracies completely ignores that and more or less allows Islam to get away with the misogyny and all the other terrible things that they do. Because of this special treatment, which I suspect it maybe stems from the fear of being thought racist. So, to repeat, the chief victims of Islam are Muslims themselves, and Majid Nawaz and Ayaan Hirsi Ali are doing their best to help the victims of this unfortunate creed.
And there are great organizations working alongside Maryam Namazi's organization and Ex-Muslims of North America. If the chief complaint is not tied directly to what has been said, then that's just posturing. So I'll have people comment on various videos or whatever and say, oh, Matt might be good on the God issue, but he's terrible on this, or this, you know. And they'll use language that's obnoxious and annoying. But I ask them all the same question. What is my position that you disagree with, and why do you think it's wrong? Nobody's ever even gotten the first one right. Instead, they will saddle me with somebody else's position or something they heard or something that they have interpreted based on their own confusion about what's said. And if we can't get past, we've lost sight of nuance. And if you sometimes say anything that is even vaguely in opposition to somebody's position, you become immediately the worst thing ever. And if we are going to shelter medieval, harmful, misogynistic thought as if, well, we can't criticize that because that would be racist, I don't know how you can possibly criticize anything at that point. Yes, sir.
Hi there. With a recent poll coming from Google saying that internet memes are now more popular than Jesus Christ, I was wondering, have we won? And if not, what's the defining factor that would say that atheists have won?
Well, did the Google poll say that atheist memes were, or
No,
just memes?
Just memes.
Yeah, because cats don't get us a win.
Well, Jesus Christ is a meme himself. I mean, memes simply are cultural, the equivalent of cultural genes. They're that which spreads through the culture by any means, whether it's by humans imitating other humans or radio jingles or that kind of thing. So I think you're using the word internet meme as, for a particular subset of memes, which are kind of rectangular spaces with some kind of words in, and that for some bizarre reason has come to be used as the only kind of meme. It's just one very little example of a special kind of meme. And some of them are quite funny.
And some of them are awful.
Yeah.
I hate bad arguments, and I hate bad arguments, especially when they come from people who are defending positions I hold, because I want the other side to have the bad arguments. And so when I see bad memes from atheist organizations, I look at this Bible contradiction, and it's not. Okay, we can do a little better. And right before we get to this question, I want to say to all the people who are back here who are staring at the back of our heads, You don't know this, but for about 10 or 15 minutes before we started, I stood below you and I can see up, and I stared at the back of your heads just to make it fair. Yes.
Hi, my name is Reese. I work at Science World. You guys should come visit if you're in town for the next couple days. Earlier you were saying that, which is true, that the large majority of the world has some kind of concept of God or some kind of belief in God. Also, the large majority of the world is very poor, and often these two things go together. What is atheism's role in addressing the poverty of the world and the ignorance that comes with it? That's not really their fault.
I mean, it's a demonstrable fact that there is this correlation you talk about. The research of Gregory Paul shows this both across European countries and across states in America, that poverty, lack of social welfare, lack of social security, that kind of thing, tends to go with religiosity. And people tend to lose their religion when they have security, welfare, that sort of thing. And Scandinavian countries have the most advanced welfare systems in the world, and they're the least theistic. Atheism's role, I mean, I don't see atheism as a political movement. To me, it's a philosophical position. But obviously, as a citizen, politically, I'm in favor of reducing poverty, reducing inequality, and from that, this research seems to suggest atheism will flow.
Yeah, and I agree with Richard. I think that certainly atheist communities are more than just about atheism, because we're people. But it's my humanism that makes me want to fight and eliminate poverty. And I try, when I'm deciding what I'm going to do, there's the think globally, act locally idea. I also try to think about what would the entire world be like if everybody did the thing that I want to do, and try to work along those lines. And so if everybody donated a little bit more, if everybody worked to encourage politicians to instill policies that reduced poverty and suffering. But there's also the limit of what can any individual do. Well, one of the things that individuals can do is vote, run for office, support the sort of policies that are going to put an end to this. A collection of atheists on Reddit can raise a bunch of money and do good, as we've seen, but they're not going to end poverty. And while we as atheists and those of us who are humanists certainly have an incentive to go there, it may be that we need to set aside our differences in other areas and work with people towards specific goals. And so, like the Reverend Barry Lynn is the CEO or the president of Americans United for Church-State Separation, and I adore him. I've shared the stage with him before, and I will again. And I will share a stage with him for church-state separation, and then argue with him tooth and nail over whether or not a God exists if he wants to. And I do the same thing. When I decide what charity I might actually donate to, my first question is not, hang on, is there a religion behind this? My first question is, are they actually doing good with the money? How much of my money is going to go to those issues? What efforts can I contribute besides money to help them out? And then I will compare, hey, is there a secular version of this? Which is why I love Foundation Beyond Belief and organizations that are working to improve secular charities. I would encourage everybody, if you're not familiar with Foundation Beyond Belief, to investigate that. There's also SHARE, I believe, which is Secular Humanists Activists. I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but it's out there to do good and help people. And I'd like to see a lot more effort there. And there's always room. If you don't have the money to donate, which I was unemployed for 4 out of 10 years for a while there, you can donate your time. And you can show the world that instead of the view that they had of who atheists were, we actually are your neighbors. We are scientists. We are jackasses. We are the people who deliver your mail. And we actually care about other people. We care about what kind of world we live in. And that's the reason that we talk about religion, because we see religions, while certainly people do good in the name of their religion, there is a lot of harm. And it could be, as I was saying before, better without the baggage.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks for coming to Vancouver. I just finished reading a book by one of the murdered editors of Charlie Hebdo, and he talks about the problems with the word Islamophobia. So I'm wondering, what are your opinions on using that term, Islamophobia?
I think we've dealt with that in the previous question, haven't we? I mean, Islamophobia is an absurd word. It's a made-up word to describe this privileged position that Islam has in our society, and I do not think it's a word that should have currency.
And the only thing I'd add is I'm not overly concerned about the labels for things if they get in the way. I just released a video recently about the atheist label, the agnostic label, and things like that. At the end of the day, if Richard had called himself an atheist, and I said, oh, no, I don't want to call myself an atheist, but neither one of us believe in a God, and we're both working towards it, then if the label's in the way, then get rid of it. I don't think the label for atheist is necessarily in the way, but when there are attempts to label people as Islamophobes, merely to avoid having the discussion about what we should or shouldn't address and what are the limits, and is somebody going too far, and should we actually oppose certain things, if the label discussion is preventing that one, then that just needs to go away, because the other discussion is far more important.
I am phobic about beheading people, about whipping people, about apostasy being punished by death, women having their clitorises cut off. I'm phobic about all that. If you want to call that Islamophobia, do, but I prefer not to use the word.
Thank you both for coming. Mr. Dawkins, I've read most of your books, and I've been a big fan for several years, so it's good to see you here. My question is more about AI. I watched a TED Talk with Sam Harris, and I know you've been into computers for several years as well. Do you think we will ever achieve AI? And if so, would that AI ever become religious?
It's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure why it gets a laugh. AI meaning artificial intelligence?
Yes.
Why is that funny?
If I had to guess, I think they're anticipating an entertaining answer on whether or not AI would become religious.
Okay. I think it's a fascinating topic, scientifically, philosophically, actually. The question of consciousness is deeply, deeply mysterious, and it may well be solved by AI research eventually. So I think that's very interesting. I now understand why there was laughter. I misheard it. I thought, I didn't hear the word religious. I thought you said pernicious. Which maybe, yeah.
It's a toss-up as to which one is more dangerous.
Exactly, yeah. Well, you could program it to become anything, I suppose. So you could certainly, you could program a religious robot if you wanted to. Some of you may have read Douglas Adams's Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, where there's a character in it called the Electric Monk, which is a robot device, a machine you buy to do your believing for you. In the same way as you buy video recorders to do your television watching for you. Save you the trouble of watching it yourself. The Electric Monk does your believing for you. And the Mark II Electric Monk is capable of believing things they wouldn't believe in Salt Lake City. I suppose you could ask a sort of philosophically interesting question: would evolving artificial intelligence robots evolve towards religiosity in their own right without being programmed to do so? And I can't see how that would ever happen.
Although if they evolved to eventually believe that they had a creator, they'd actually be right.
Hello, Richard. I just want to first thank you for all the work you've done for evolutionary biology and public understanding of science. I first read your book when I was a young boy growing up in Nashville, Tennessee, in an evangelical Christian family, and it really impacted my life for the better. So thank you so much. My question is, Richard, we know how difficult it could be for a gene to be eradicated from gene pool, especially the gene is somewhat resistant to some of the antibacterial substance we're trying to use to eradicate. For example, like in the case of SARS, we often use quite aggressive measure to interrupt that. So in a meme of religion, when it often could be resistant to the supposed Q, that is logic, what kind of confidence could we have in eradicating those memes in a foreseeable future?
I only heard half that. What was it? What confidence in eradicating?
What confidence could we have for eradicating memes of religion when those memes seem to be resistant to logic, often, that is?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Yes. It does seem that people who are indoctrinated in childhood, at a sensitive age in childhood, have an almost total, can have an almost total resistance to logic. And I know of some examples of people highly educated in science, for example, who, because they've been indoctrinated as children into the belief that the world is young, they cannot accept, even when they see the evidence, even when they, at one level, understand the evidence. So there is extreme resistance, and I'm constantly impressed in a negative way by the tenacity of religious belief in the face of evidence and logic. It's one of the most pessimistic things, I think, about the human species, is that it is possible to indoctrinate children so thoroughly that they are immune to logic and reason. But I think it may only be a minority, and I think that what gives me more hope is that there are lots and lots of people who are perfectly open to reason and logic and science, but who just haven't been exposed to it. And therefore, if we try to expose them to it, try to give people the knowledge of science, that they will learn. I have a very encouraging story about a young man who came to Oxford. He was a young earth creationist. He came from, I think, somewhere in Washington State. And he believed the world was young and didn't believe in evolution. He attended my course of lectures at Oxford in evolution. And the end of the last lecture, he came down to the front and thumped the desk with his fist and said, "Gee, this evolution, it really makes sense." And it was clear that he just never met it before. I mean, he'd been to university, he'd majored in biology, but it was left out of the curriculum, as if it was possible to leave it out of the curriculum in biology.
There are some people who may, in fact, be immune. How do you tell the difference between somebody who is and somebody who isn't?
I generally ask the question of why would change your mind, and if they say nothing, the conversation is over.
I almost agree. I've had people say nothing. That's an expression of their confidence level currently. Doesn't mean it's an expression of their confidence level after an actual conversation. The fear that I have, that I'd like to disabuse people of, is you're never going to talk people out of those things. Yes, you can. I have thousands upon thousands of emails of people who've changed their mind because of what we've done on the TV show or in debates or from Richard's books or the blogs and things like that. And I know he gets emails on this as well. People change their mind. We have to be vigilant in presenting good information to combat bad information. And with some people, it's going to stick. And with some people, it's not, or it's not now. Now, there could be a theist that has listened to the show, my show, and still hasn't changed their mind, and yet a friend of theirs comes up and says the same thing I've said, perhaps in a slightly different way, where they have some connection to them, and then their mind is changed. Until I can tell the difference between the person who will never change their mind and the person who might change their mind, I'm going to keep talking, assuming that they're both in the category of the people who can change their mind. Because that's the only way that you're going to make progress. If you begin with this assumption that this is a waste of time, well, that's entirely your prerogative. There are people who say, oh, you're never going to change people's minds. Well, you're probably not thinking like that. But those of us who do this for a living are going to keep working on it and keep being optimistic, because I want, seriously, my goal is to change the world. I don't think it's going to happen during my lifetime. I don't think it's going to happen on my own. I have tons of people helping in this effort. I am blessed with a great many intelligent colleagues that are working towards the same goal. But having a goal that I can't possibly reach, or probably can't reach, is not disheartening to me in the slightest, because I see constant and increasing progress. And when I read Steven Pinker's great book on the better angels of our nature, talking about we are living in the best of times, when I get emails from people, when I meet people out in the lobby at events who are, hey, I was a fundamentalist Christian, I was a Scientologist, I was a Buddhist, whatever, and because of things that you've done, I've now changed my mind. That's all I ever needed. And I told the story briefly. After a debate, there was a 12-year-old girl who came up and said that, her parents had let her explore different religious views, and after this debate, she was an atheist. And I would debate for another 10 years without changing a single mind, just in the hope of getting one more 12-year-old girl. It's good enough for me.
There are, we get lots and lots of such things. It's very, very heartening, the number of people who come up when I'm signing books, for example, time after time after time. They say they've changed their minds. It's very, very encouraging. One more encouraging thing, let me tell you. There is no legal Arabic translation of the God delusion, but there is an illicit, illegal Arabic translation of the God delusion, which can be downloaded as a PDF. And it has been downloaded 10 million times. One third of that, 3 million or so, has been downloaded in Saudi Arabia.
Wow. And by the way, I wanted to mention that it's the 10th anniversary of the God delusion. It's also the 40th anniversary of the selfish gene, which was essentially your introduction to the world. And while I was 7 at the time, I read it as soon as I could. Yes.
Professor Dawkins, welcome to Vancouver. I think it took 21 years to see you in person. So anyway, I've been a fan of your books since 1995, and Selfish Gene was the start. My question is about the God module. As you know, there have been some research done on the fact that, well, if it's a fact, that believing in God and superstitions is hardwired. I'm talking about the research that Michael Persinger did at Laurentian University, and you yourself actually tried the God helmet as well. So if that's the case, if it's hardwired, then I don't think any education can convince the people who are hardwired to believe in superstitions and God and gods. Then I don't think education can do any enlightenment for them to see the reality. And it seems like believing superstitions and God is an evolutionary tool for them to survive the horrible life that we have in terms of survivalship, that they can rely on some sort of supreme source just to go through the hard time of whatever that is. And personally, I think that there is an offshoot in the evolution of human mind, and it's us, the atheists, who have the hardwire again to see the reality, to realize that there's no God, there's no creator as such. After, I would say, 20 years of the internet, information is free for everyone. I expected that by 2005 there would be no theist ever. All the information is out there. I can understand, I can see where we come from, 3.9 billion years of evolution on Earth. It's pretty easy to see. I see it but it seems like 80 to 90% of people can't. If that's the case, that believing God is hardwired, why educate them about something that would be futile?
Yes, I think the phrase hardwired can be overdone and can be understood as being too rigid. I did submit to Michael Persinger's helmet. He's a Canadian researcher who puts a modified motorcycle helmet on your head and passes magnetic fields through your brain, and claims that in 80% of cases he can induce mystical or religious experiences. I was looking forward to this. I didn't expect to see God. I think I expected to sort of feel a strange oneness with the universe, that kind of thing. But I got nothing at all. This was done as an experiment by the BBC, and because it was television, there was only one control, and the control was a local vicar, and he also claimed to have no religious experience under the influence of the helmet. But Michael Persinger told me afterwards that whereas my EEG, my brainwave patterns, were exactly those of the 20% who don't get this experience, the vicar was a prime candidate. He was right in the middle of the 80% who do. But his brainwaves indicated that he was struggling not to submit to this, and he was doing something like reciting the multiplication tables or something to try to shut it out. I think you're seduced by the phrase hardwired, because you take it to mean irrevocable, and so it does when it's normally used. I don't think anybody would really want to suggest that there's neurological evidence that it's hardwired in that sense. We've already discussed the probably perhaps minority of people who cannot be changed, but then we had this in the answer to the previous question, this more encouraging evidence that a lot of people do actually change their minds. Many of the activists in the atheist movement are actually ex-vicars, ex-priests, ex-preachers, and ex-fundamentalists like Matt.
Yeah, which is why I reject the premise. And actually, I'd like to see him put his helmet on all the members of the Clergy Project to see. Now you've got people who were ostensibly very religious for a great deal of time and are not now. Obviously, we can't go back in time and put the helmet on them beforehand. But yeah, I don't think that. Like I said, well, I'll just go back to my previous answer. I can't tell the difference between somebody who may be irrevocably religious and those who are able to see reason. But we really got to move on to another question.
The Clergy Project, by the way, is another initiative of the Richard Dawkins Foundation. It's to take preachers, pastors, vicars, rabbis, imams who have lost their faith, and there are lots of them. There are more than 500 of them in the Clergy Project now, and give them a website, a refuge where they can
There are
go.
actually more than 666 because I know the person who got that number.
Even better. So these are clergy people who've lost their faith and who are, in many cases, struggling on and carrying on preaching in church every Sunday. And they can go to the Clergy Project website and cry on each other's shoulders and discuss their predicament, because it is a predicament. I mean, they're stuck with this profession that they don't believe in. And it's very difficult for them to leave, not only for financial reasons, but because they lose respect of the community and things like that.
Sorry to interrupt. We have time for 3 more questions, Matt.
3 more questions. Number 1.
Thanks, gentlemen, for... Hello.
Sorry, what
thanks
was that
very much.
I did that at a debate and got in trouble for it.
I just wanted to say thanks to both you guys for sharing your time today. It's been 4 months on my skeptical journey, which has started at Hitchens and went to Dawkins and Dennett and Harris and eventually Dillahunty. So
you're moving downhill, is that?
No, I know. You jumped there. So yeah, it's kind of a special night for me. And Richard, I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but those socks just ironically remind me of Christmas. I just had to mention that.
Remind me of who?
Christmas.
Oh, Christmas, right.
But the question that I had was, in your experience, which God and subsequent argument have you encountered that you find the most challenging to refute?
I think literally none.
And I would say the deistic God, because it is so poorly defined, it is untestable, unfalsifiable, it is a nothing. And how do you, I mean, at least some of the other religions are trying to identify and label their God in a way where we can say, this contradicts, this is in conflict with nature and everything else. The deistic God, my thing is, why would anybody believe that? What possible justification could you have for believing, there's something, but I don't know what it is? I mean, aren't you at that point claiming to detect the undetectable, or at least be able to reason yourself to, I just can't believe that there's nothing, so there must be something. That it is as useless a concept to me as the word spirituality, which is tossed around. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. This is spiritual. What the hell does that mean? And you talk about whether or not you put on the God helmet and you have a mystical spiritual experience. I don't even know if I would have one if I would use any of those words to describe it. Maybe I'll put the helmet on and I'll finally understand what spiritual means. But for now, it's gobbledygook. Yes.
Hi, good evening to both of you. My name is Madhvi. I'm here on behalf of what we call SAHA, South Asian Humanist Association. After 12 years of struggling to keep my thoughts to myself, I recently, a few years ago, have come out and started to voice my opinions, my views, and I've made, most of my friends they're there in my life, but they don't like me anymore. I've been fondly labeled atheist terrorist, and I've been told that I'm bombarding them with atheism, and it's too intense for them. So they like me, but they don't want it. If I don't talk about atheism, I'm included. But if I talk about atheism or humanism, I'm not. So, and my husband tells me, maybe you're overdoing it. If you want to keep any friends, maybe you don't want to do it as much. So I'm torn between my
friends talk
desire
about
to talk about it, express my views, and keeping these friends that have been in my life for over 20 years. And what boggles my mind is 95% of them are all doctors and practicing professionals with 2-3 university degrees. And I'm not able to get to them. Like you answered, you said, where do I stop? Do I stop or do I keep talking? Not caring about whether I'm accepted.
So do they talk to you about their religious views?
I'm born in a Hindu family. All my Hindu friends send me, we have like million festivals every year, and I get 300 or so from different WhatsApp groups and Facebook, different religious messages, and I post one related to atheism or humanism or a non-religious post. I'm an enemy.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm like I'm so elated here looking at all these people. I'm like, I want to make friends with everybody.
Do. Motley, this is everybody. This is Motley. You guys can exchange numbers, friend each other on Facebook. So the standard joke is that I don't make outgoing calls on the show and I don't go knocking door to door saying, hey, have you stopped believing in Jesus yet? I can help. I engage in conversations with the people who want to. Now, my Facebook page, my social media, of course I'm going to talk about this stuff. Anybody who is disinterested in that can piss off. But I don't want to minimize the impact of losing people who have been in your social structure for years. And this is something that we deal with all the time. I get email from people who've been ostracized from their families and have lost their friends. This is one of the reasons why there are a lot of atheist organizations creating good landing places. Sunday Assembly, Oasis. Now, they get labeled as like atheist church. They're not that, and church is a necessarily Protestant term, but now I'm being pedantic. What they are attempts for secular people to say, no, religion, you don't get to co-opt this aspect of humanity and claim it as yours. We are social creatures, we want to interact. And my friend and co-host Jen Peoples has said repeatedly, you're family if you act like family. And so on some occasions, as unfortunate as it is, you may need to build a new family and a new group. And that is what humanist organizations and Sunday Assembly and Oasis and these, they're trying to do. Let's build better ways for people to network so that you don't feel like you're alone. I get email all the time saying, I'm the only atheist in my town. No, you're not. You're not even, unless you're the only person in your town. And maybe not even then, if you have like multiple personalities. But I go back to V.S. Ramachandran's research on hemispherectomies, but I'm glad you're here, and please talk to the people around here. And I'm sure, is there anybody here who's a member of a secular organization in Vancouver who would like to help build networks with other people like her that would want to be here? Just interact.
I'm a member of Vancouver Atheist Republic. I think some of my friends are here.
Yes. Unfortunately, I never ended a relationship with somebody after I gave up my religion. They were always the ones to end it with me. And it hurt, and it hurt, and it hurt. And then I was like, hang on. I actually want people to like me for who I am. And if you being a part of my life is conditioned on me accepting what you believe, or not challenging what you believe, or not being allowed to speak about who I am and what I think, I don't need you in my life as much as I thought I did. And it hurts, but sometimes that's the case.
I said that.
I think it is one of the most pernicious aspects of religion that it has the power to divide families and divide people from their friends. And I regularly am greatly saddened by getting letters from people exactly like you say, who say, how can I do this? My parents disown me, or I'm making my parents miserable, and so I suppose there are other things that can do that, but religion has the almost unique power to sever people from the people they love, and it's one of the most wicked things about religion, that it can do that.
And we have what I guess is the last question from this side. Thank you so much.
First of all, thank you very much for your time, both of you. And just a quick response to Matt. You said you're not sure whether you would ever manage to change the world. I would submit that both of you certainly have, and for the better, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you. That's a really good way of taking the pressure off having the last question, so good job.
My question is mostly to Richard. In my time at UBC and hearing from my friends at other universities around the world, I've noticed that the climate on campuses has gotten significantly more toxic and more difficult to navigate, to have a free and open discussion about many topics. And drawing on your experience as chair for the Public Understanding of Science, what are specific policies, notions, ideas, ways in which universities as institutions specifically can work to improve public discussion, airing of ideas, and a campus culture that is conducive to the public understanding of science and the general improvement of the illumination of mankind, to give it a lofty title?
Universities need to rediscover what universities are all about, which is a forum for discussion, civilized discussion of intellectual issues, and not to become, well, I think the most distressing examples of what's going wrong is the university where I first taught, University of California at Berkeley, the home of the free speech movement, which in recent times has been also the home of disinviting people because there's a fear that they might offend somebody. Well, you go to university in